All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of On the Bench by Yamaha Guitars. And I am joined today by one of our favorite artists, James LoMenzo. How you doing, man?
I'm on the bench, baby. It doesn't get better than this. How are you doing?
Doing all right. So, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, how are you? How's the family? Like, everybody's safe, healthy, happy, still
Everyone's
working?
healthy. We're healthy, wealthy, and wise. I don't know about the wealthy part so much, but we have other things besides, the
Yeah.
cash flow.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, you guys are doing all right. I've missed you, man. It's been a while.
I have
So,
work. I have work for you, my friend.
oh, yeah.
I
I
have been
mean,
thinking.
yeah, well, I mean, I have been able to do some stuff at home. I did a build here at the house, but actually, I've been in the shop a few days a week. We have some protocols where we're kind of like, doing skipping days and stuff like that. And Yamaha's like really, really particular about being safe, in the
Sure.
workshop. But yeah, I'd love to see some of your great basses and stuff. I see the collection behind you. It looks pretty stellar.
Yeah. Well, Gray's needing a little bit of love. Where is he? Oh, he's over there. I'm sorry. I'm looking. I'm looking at the screen. Everything's backwards. But yeah, old Gray needs a little bit of help with his nut, which sounds really weird, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great to see that bass again. It's been a while. That's a really cool one too. I guess we could talk a little bit about your instrument. I'd love to hear some more about your history, how you got started with Yamaha and stuff. But I think for a lot of the folks out there, they'd love to just know more about you personally. So your story growing up and how you got into music. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, where'd you grow up? What was your first bass?
Okay. Well, I'm still making music for a living, so obviously I haven't completely grown up. Um,
No, no. I mean, that's perfect. Who wants to grow up?
I started being interested in music at a very early age. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I've got two other brothers. My dad loved music, just really was over the moon about any kind of music. At the time, we are probably talking about, let's see, if I'm born in 1959, I'm starting to become aware in 60, 61, 62.
Mhm.
So my fondest memories are my dad kind of bringing us into the living room, my brothers and I, and going through his record collection, which he had a pretty good record collection because his brother, my uncle, worked for Billboard
Oh, cool.
magazine. And they used to get a lot of records, and they were physical, 45s.
Yeah,
So he'd bring piles of records to our home.
that's
And my
awesome.
dad had this little Victrola, that's what it was called. It was like that big square wooden box with a needle that had come down and a built-in speaker and all that.
Yeah,
And he'd kind of pile up like, four or five of those 45s. And as little kids, it was mesmerizing, because it was just like the sound was filling the room. And
yeah,
some of it was like a lot of leftover 60s and 50s stuff, like Who Wrote the Book of Love, like all that kind of stuff that you kind of remember,
yeah,
from like like from Greece and Mel's Diner, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So we started listening to that. As time went on, my dad had purchased one of those big console TVs and around 1964 or so, like that,
Oh, yeah,
or 65. You're going to have to check me on this because I'm just trying to scatologically figure out what it was. But anyway, it was the first color TV, and it
yeah.
had
Wow.
two big speakers on the sides of this, I guess it was like a 20-inch cathode tube. And on one side, on the right side, was the radio section and the amplifier section, and on the other side, you open a door there, and it was the dungeon where you'd put the 33, the
Yeah,
big records, and that spindle would hold seven easily. I mean, this was a monster. So
that's
they
awesome.
so they hauled this thing into our house just in time for the television premiere of um, what was it? It was The Wizard of Oz. And the
Oh,
cool thing about The Wizard of Oz, which was again just mind blowing for a tiny little 5 or 6 year old, was that that movie starts in black and white, and all of a sudden it blasts into color when they go to Oz. So I
yeah,
mean, it's taking full advantage of the television and the sound and all that stuff. But the real trick to that TV was that now we were able to listen to whatever albums we could get, and that was crazy. One of the records that came with that Victrola, with that big console thing, was trying to remember the name of it, but it was a Latin thing, and it wasn't by any particular artist, but it was created by some studio to show you how cool the stereo was. And so it had like claves and congas and all this, and they just split the instruments really hard left and right, so you could notice like, ooh, listen, whoa, look what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And my dad would play that for us, and that was like all of a sudden the cool thing about that was it started tuning my ears and my brother's ears into like, wow, what is rhythm? You know, like let's listen to this now.
Yeah.
Right around then, the Beatles come along, and they really do. 64, 65, I guess, right? And they invade America, and so we go and get the Meet the Beatles record. My dad was, Italian dude, singer, construction worker. Unfortunately, he really didn't want to play music, but he bought a whole bunch of crooner records, like Jimmy Roselli and Jerry Vale, like all these Italian guys who sing like this. It was beautiful, too much vibrato, but a really smooth voice and stuff, and most of them sing in Italian. So, but listening to that really turned me on to like sounds, orchestration, like, all these, to me, it was like the sound was one big instrument. I couldn't identify like, that's a cello section and that's, that's trumpets and all that. It just sounded like this big homogenized like thing. Every song had this different character because of that. So again, that was kind of tuning my ear in a way. And then in the midst of all that, the Beatles came out, and that was very direct. That's just a bunch of guys singing and, minus the women screaming on TV. But, he would slip that into like the pile, and he would dutifully listen to that with us. And he thought it was great anyway, because he realized there was energy and music in it. And, we got excited because of that, because that was something that, was socially just a huge thing at the moment. And musically is a really interesting thing as well. So let's crash forward. Somewhere along the line, probably around 66 or so, I'm like, I want to play the drums. I didn't want to be Ringo Starr. I thought the guys up front was probably cooler, but I didn't want to play drums because I thought that appealed to me, just rhythm. I could bang on desks really good and figure all that out.
Everything's a drum,
Yeah.
You're a kid, so you're like, let's bang on some stuff.
Actually, you know what? When I'm in a hurry in here and I don't want to like fire up the computer or run out into the garage and set up anything, anything is a drum. that's how I build my rhythms. But so my parents for Christmas, they bought me this little metal toy drum set, and that was enough for me. It seemed huge, So I remember trying to get a grip on it and playing along with the sitcoms of the day, which are like The Munsters and Bewitched and all that, which they had these really great intros and outros, really musical. Like some of it was a little rock and roll, some of it was like pop. And so, I tried to get my stuff together on there. After that, I started like getting somewhat good on that. And so the next thing, like later on, what happened was I kind of got sick one summer. I caught like probably one of these COVID things that's going around. I don't know. But I was in bed for the summer. And so they brought me a snare to like have into my room to like work on rudiments and stuff like that. And that was thrilling to me, So that's what I did. I just got really good on that. And after a while, I suppose they had enough because, my folks were like, don't you like those guitars? They're nice,
Yeah, they've had enough.
Around that time, I was also interested in singing, and my voice was kind of starting to sound like something. And so, for Christmas, they bought, if it wasn't for my folks, I wouldn't be talking to you right now, I promise you, or maybe, but not musically. Probably be talking about making guitars and not playing them.
Hey, I could go on for hours about making guitars.
We're going to turn the show over to you in a minute, my friend. Let me squeeze this all together. So I get a guitar. And, they get me this old teacher guy, and he was a sweetheart, but he just like, we were playing like old stuff from the 40s and 30s, bye-bye blues. It wasn't really it wasn't speaking to me like everything that was on the radio at that moment. So what I did get good at was strumming out the chords, because I learned all the chords, and just singing. And so my whole thing was like, I'll just be a singing guy. All of a sudden, American Pie comes on the radio, stuff like that, all the Creedence stuff. And like, you could just sing with a guitar, it was all acoustic guitar at that point. And so I'd go, so this is how I started. Like, I got pretty good at it. Again, my uncle from Billboard, not only was he bringing records home, he was bringing music books home to me, bringing a shopping bag full of like, the Beatles Complete and, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and just like Frigid Pink, The House of the Rising Sun, just the chord sheet, And I was like, I prefer the Animals one, but okay, same chords, good. So I learned how to play There Is a House. I learned how to play that on guitar. And so I got a repertoire together. And so the first thing I did was like go into my school with a guitar one day. And the teacher was like, well, that's nice. You want to come up and play a song? So I played a song for the class, like an idiot. I wasn't scared. Because I guess because my parents doted on me so much. Parents, take care of your kids. They'll become great someday. So I did that, and the teacher said, why don't you go down the hall, and, I'll bring you over there, and brought me to another class to do it. And so the best and worst thing that happened to me that day, because all of a sudden I thought, I don't even have to sit in the boring classroom anymore. I could just run around with a guitar, and that's my life. Bad idea. But good idea for music, because I really still applied myself to it. And so I moved along. I played talent shows, blah, blah, blah. And then I finally decided to put together a band, got together with some guys. Everybody's playing guitar. There was no such thing as a bass at that point because we didn't conceptualize it, and nobody played it. So I go to the summer camp when I'm around 11, 12, or 13. And some guy is playing what I identify as a bass guitar, although I didn't really know what it was, right? And it was just this wonderful sound. I was literally on the lake in a rowboat, and I heard this wham going over the thing, and I thought, whoa, listen to that. It's moving everywhere, So I rode in as quick as I could, and inside one of the practice places, it was a music camp. Still there, by the way. It's a place called French Woods in PA. There was this guy named Gene, kick back with an EB-0 or EB3. It had the two pickups.
Yeah.
And he's like just thumping on it, bored to tears. I guess he didn't really want to go to the camp. But he looked at me being all excited about it, and he goes, yeah, it's a bass guitar, check it out. So he put it in my hands, and I was just like, boom, boom. And I was like, wow, this is great. Because, immediately I realized that this is like a bridge to melody and rhythm, like both things that I was like really into. And I really still just wanted to sing at that point. So I thought, well, I could just back myself up with this, and I could actually do more interesting things with an instrument than just strumming, because I still hadn't conceptualized lead guitar playing, and at the same time, Jimi Hendrix had just tipped his hat around that time, and I saw him at Woodstock. My cousin was like, "You've got to see Jimi Hendrix. You're not going to believe it." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, Purple Haze." He goes, "No, it's more than that." So we go and see the Woodstock movie, and at the end they show Jimmy playing to probably nobody, like some beer cans and a few people, right? And well, that's the way Woodstock worked out. But I watched him play, man. My jaw hit the floor because I was like, this guy is a god, man. Look at that. And I could not conceptualize what that was. And so I immediately I'm a bass player, out of pure fear. I was like, if I can't do that, like, why even try, So at that time, we're talking in the early 70s, 1969, 70, 71. The bass was like this superhero instrument still. It didn't, we didn't get to Van Halen yet. Guitar didn't really come that far forward yet. I mean, Hendrix was kind of doing it, but it wasn't obvious. And so producers would just crank the hell out of the bass. Like you listen to the Beach Boys records and everything that, anything, like listen to the Doors that like are right up until 69, 70. Listen to any record. And the bass is just driving in these unique melodic, rhythmic ways. And not only that, just around the corner, you've got Stanley Clarke and Jaco Pastorius, and at the very same time, you've got Chris Squire. You've got all these different sounds coming at you left and right. Tim Bogart. And so I was hearing all these things on records, and like they grabbed my ears in so many different ways, tonally, approach-wise, everything. That if I was hooked before, I was completely hooked. Then I actually kind of stopped singing. I gave up. I wanted to be a great bass player, and lesson learned, actually. You get a lot more control of the band if you sing. So kids, if you're singing, keep singing. But anyway, so I decided to try and get good at this thing. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, if you could do both at once, it's a 2-for-1.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm still stereo. I have a 2-track mind. So I can't conceptualize that far ahead. But now I know the difference.
So how old were you at the time when you're rowing on the lake?
Well, I'm rowing on the lake. I'm 12 years old. So I'm just about to be 13. My voice is coincidentally just about to change. So any Michael Jackson dreams that I had at that point were going to come crashing down on me because all of a sudden I couldn't sing every note I wanted to. So that required even more. I went for voice lessons not too long after that too because I realized that, like, where did that part go? I was using that. They were like, well, now you have to do it this way. I was like, oh, it doesn't sound as good that way. So anyway, so yeah, that was 12. 13 is when I got really serious at it. In fact, just to tie up that cozy little story about the camp thing, when I finally got back to my home in Brooklyn, the first thing I did was take the two big strings off of my guitar, the E and the A, I'm sorry, the small strings off my guitar, the E, the B, and the G, the E and the B,
Yeah.
and I left the four strings, and I
Yeah.
turned the tone down on the guitar, and I had a amp made by Lafayette for guitars, two 12-inch speakers and a Will to Survive, but it just had a tone knob like left and right, like a stereo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I turned that all the way to the left, and I just kind of aped what I was doing up there at the camp,
Wow.
and until I could save up enough money to buy a cheap little bass guitar, which I did.
That's so cool. I love that story of, having the console. I remember that my grandpa had the console TV and stuff too, and it's just like you had your hands on stuff. Like when you had a record, it was cool because it just like was more involved. You'd look at the artwork.
You'd literally you would cherish it. You'd keep it clean so it wouldn't make so much noise. You'd look at the thing. It was like this magic platter. There was so much that came out of these little pieces of vinyl, and you would just like kind of stack it up carefully and make sure your tone arm was working well. And those things were arcane back then. They weren't even to where it ended up like in the 80s when they started getting into the real hi-fi stuff,
Yeah, and it's just like this whole, area of discovery when you're young. Like you said, you're hearing the left and the right, and it's just like this whole kind of wonder of, how did they do this? What do they, it's like, I feel like that's such a great, way to learn about music. And then you play drums. It's like a really solid kind of bass for rhythm, so you learn how to hold down the tune. And I know you, like you said, it's just like all these bass tracks, they were cranking the bass, and it was about the melody. It was about the song, and, having something to dance to and have fun, in the clubs. It seems like it was a little bit more dance oriented or like communal fun, when it was shows about just great music like the Beatles and stuff, where it's all more rhythmically based instead of kind of like these high flying solos that came later.
I loved it, man. When Van Halen came out, I loved that power,
Oh yeah.
And if you listen to those records, they're mixed fine. I mean, every instrument on there is just cranking away. Michael Anthony sounds beautiful on those records.
Oh.
And but when we finally crossed the line and got our Atlantic record deal with White Lion, man, I was almost in tears when we finished mixing that record. I stepped out of the room and left the guitar player and the singer in there for too long, and they both held a gun to Michael Wagner's head. And then I came out, I was going, I have all these movements in the music and you can't even hear them. I'm not going to argue with success. Those records did very well, but to my ear, they're not what I wanted to hear, because it's not what drove me to, to become a good bass player,
Yeah. Well, that whole story of you joining White Lion and stuff is pretty incredible too. Tell that.
I told you this over a burrito one day, I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah.
I wish we had one right now. We should. Don't you wish we could put on our masks and go get a burrito right now?
I'd love to. I haven't had. I haven't been to a restaurant in a while, so I would love.
That's why we're talking right now, and you're not sitting there with oxygen trying to reach me.
Yeah.
So anyway, what was that? We were talking about joining White Lion, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're skipping around a bit, but it just seems like so you save up for your first bass. That's kind of where we left off there.
Well, the interesting thing about saving up for the first bass, the bass cost me $20, which back then in the 70s was probably, equivalent to maybe $150, $200 like you would spend, right?
Yeah.
The strings, however, the price of those haven't changed. And if anything, they've gotten cheaper. I went to the store, the Italian music store. They sold a lot of accordions in my neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And
mandolins.
I don't remember the name. But anyway, I walked all the way, like 20 blocks, all the way up to the store, and I said, I need bass strings because I only have one on there. And they were like, oh, here's the set. And it was, back then in 1970, it was $33.
Whoa.
That's more than I paid for the bass. The guy that was, it'll last you for the life of the bass. He has flat wounds. And so I was like, well, I guess. But I remember thinking, what have I got myself into here, man?
Wow.
Now I need a big amp. What's happening?
Jeez, that's crazy. So yeah, I mean, so you get your first bass. I like the story of you taking the top two strings off and turning your tone down and stuff, and like, so just once you heard the bass, it kind of like changed your whole world, huh?
Well, yeah, and I was able to identify it easily. Again, getting back to my dad, he bought this big Chrysler Newport, 1970. And it had this John Gotti approved trunk, if you know what I mean. It was like this huge infinite baffle with one 6x9 speaker for AM radio, and AM radio was a condensed form anyway. Anyway, all the Motown stuff was coming through that speaker, just like whatever was on the radio, you know. WABC, Ray Charles, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, obviously, the Doors, the Stones. And you could hear every bass note just because of the size of that trunk. It would reinforce every note. You know, those notes were up front. So I really started, like, because I was interested in the instrument, I started really tuning into what was happening, you know, and really kind of registering and learning. You know, every time I had to go somewhere for a drive, you know, with the folks, it was like, you know, it was all getting in there.
That's so cool. I love this whole story. So you know, your history of joining White Lion and stuff, you know, you went back and forth to LA a couple of times, and you did some other gigs. You're a courier, right? Riding your bike. And
I am a motorcycle messenger. One of the most fun gigs I had in my life. When I came back to, I originally came to LA with a band that was doing club gigs in New Jersey and Long Island. What were we called? We were called Scavenger, Feeding on the World. But we actually just played a lot of dance stuff, and we could sing, like all four of us could sing like the Eagles or Queen, like we could harmonize very well. That's and cool. Everybody could play an instrument, and so we were like a complete thing. And so this guy signs us up, and not a record label, a manager, turned out to be actually a jeweler who was based out of Vegas, and set us up in places, and that fell apart reasonably quickly. Interesting little turn on that. He had us set up at the SIR studios out in it was Santa Monica at the time, out here in LA, and we'd go there every day. And right across from us were the Go-Go's, and our drummer started, you know, teaching Gina. She asked for lessons, and I thought she was pretty good, but you know, she just, you know, our drummer Enzo was really good, so he was giving her lessons, and we used to see them every day and stuff. So that was kind of, you know, normal and exciting, but I mean, it's kind of funny. You know, I always feel like there's 6 degrees of separation with all this stuff. If you're a musician, you just run into everybody. Anyway, the managers had gambled on a basketball game, unbeknownst to us, using the money they put in a bank account for us. And so all of a sudden we were like, okay, you know, they were like, yeah, we're not managing you anymore, and we don't have any rent. And the guy who we were renting for down in Van Nuys was like, don't think you're staying. He actually had a shotgun. He goes, yeah, you got to go. And I was like, well, I agree. Yeah, I agree. So kind of muddled around for a little while longer, and then went back to LA, not necessarily licking my wounds. I just, you know, there was nothing going on. So went back to New York, crashed at my parents' house. My dad put me on a construction gig so I could earn some money. And that's a whole nother, we don't have time to go into all that, but that was interesting, to say the least. And I started playing with, did I start? No, not yet. So I'm sitting there, and then I thought, nah, you know what, I'm going to give that thing one more go. So I had a motorcycle at the time. I had this P-Bass. It was a cheap one. It didn't even sound very good or play very well, but it was serviceable. Like I could just play gigs with it and stuff like that. So I took the neck off and packed it into a bag and put it on the back of my bike, and off I went. And so crashed on, I was originally going to stay with this girl I had met, which is not unusual back in the 80s, you know. And when I got there, she wasn't having it. Not that, you know, I guess she met somebody else in between the 2 weeks it took me to pack up my stuff. So my cousin put me on his couch, love him, and I was right down from the Whiskey Go. So I found an ad. I took a job as a motorcycle messenger, and it was great because I learned LA, like, you know, freeways and all that just by doing. $8 an hour was terrific back then. It was mind blowing. You know, I didn't have any rent or anything like that. I just had to buy some food and stuff. So I did that for a while, and then one morning, as happens to most motorcycles, you know, there are two kinds of motorcycles: the ones that haven't crashed yet, and the ones that will crash. You know, and I was both of those that one morning, and it wasn't a terrifying thing. It wasn't horrible. I was actually pretty good on the bike. If you could drive, I used to message on the motorcycle in New York. If you can do that in Manhattan, that's like being in a video game. I mean, you're pretty adept at what's going on, and that's really the way to stay alive on a motorcycle, is to really know what's going on, forward, back, everything's coming, right? So I was firing a lot faster when I was a kid, trust me. But anyway, I this I was going like 5 miles an hour coming to a stop next, and this Lincoln Continental just wails out the thing, and I say that because it had the long '70s nose, so like the front of the car was there before the driver was even thinking about it, and so I was just like, no time, no space, the sidewalk was right there, so I basically just kind of tried to exit the bike as quick as I could and just let it go. And as I was getting off, I had changed the oil the night before. So this bike had a bottom fairing to cut wind, and I didn't put that back on out of laziness, and there was a sharp edge, so I'd cut my knee. So I'm laying there and I'm going, oh, I need stitches, the whole thing. So anyway, they come and clean up the thing, and they take me to a hospital and sew me up, and I'm out of work. The bike forks are bent, it's just stupid stuff, and I'm trying to figure out what the move is. Anyway, I'm on my cousin's couch, and I'm sitting there going, man, I'm running out of money fast. I got to do something, probably go back to New York. So what do? I go to the Rainbow, which is, right down the block from my cousin, with a crutch, because that's cool, but, I didn't care. So I go in there, and I run into a friend of mine, this guy, John, I think his name John Lola. But anyway, what are you doing here? He goes, I'm here for the weekend, just hanging out with some friends. Great, let's have a drink. It's like, you buying? He goes, yeah. Puts it down, and so I was telling him my story. And he goes, that White Lion band, they always liked you, man. You should give them a call. I said, yeah, what are they doing? He goes, well, they're going to do a record, and, I'm pretty sure if you called them up, I have to digress that just before I left from New York, I'd gone to see them because the guys who managed them, I used to go to their rock club, L'Amour, all the time.
Yeah.
And they said, we saw you with Bobby Rondinelli and his band, and you would be great with this band. So, and I went to go see them like literally 3 days before I went to LA. And I remember thinking they were great, but I remember thinking they were exactly like Van Halen in a way, even though they weren't playing Van Halen songs. So they might have played one or two. And I thought, no, I don't. There's already a Van Halen. I don't. What am I going to do with that? So I just moved on my way. So anyway, we're back at the Rainbow, and this guy John goes, yeah, here's the number for the managers. And I said, really? Okay. So I called them up. They put me on a plane. I showed up. They had all this music, and it was really basically most of what ended up on Pride, and it sounded like just pop music to me. It didn't sound like metal. It didn't sound like it was posturing to be anything. It sounded kind of uniquely, how can I say this without sounding arrogant, but uniquely polite, which I liked pop music. You have to understand, I was never like the metal thing I grew into. When I started hearing people like Dio and Judas Priest, I was like, it's cool. But before that, it was all AM radio, So they had so many elements of that melodicism, it was melodic and, it was rhythmic enough, but it wasn't so fast that you couldn't stay with it. And Mike had a really interesting voice and a great sense of melody, and Vito was a great guitar player.
So it's like, woo.
Yeah,
It took me much later in life to realize how incredibly tight his playing is. It's so great.
Everyone I talk to, it's like, I'm so happy to meet you. What's Vito doing? Everyone, my podiatrist, everybody.
Dude, no, you got so many stories. But so you fly over there, and then what?
So I just go in there. I actually had my big ass Olympic bass. So I left that home. I had that and the P bass, and I think I even left the P bass behind. I was like, enough of that, right? So I went in there, and Mike, I was fascinated because Mike was like, he was really interested. And he was like, I know what that is. That's a great instrument, right? So they said, we're going to Germany in a couple of months. We got these songs. We'll work up the songs. We'll do a few shows, and we'll see where it goes. And I was like, never been to Germany. Living at home with my parents, so I had food and stuff like that. I got to be with them, and it just, man, we went to Germany, recorded what we thought was going to be a record, started playing some clubs, people started coming out of the woodwork. Regionally, we did really well, and Atlantic Records came around, and they just snapped us up. But they were in the middle of that whole thing. They had success with Twisted Sister, and they're going like, who else we got? Who else? Yeah. So we really fit the bill at that moment.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's I think just kind of a testament to always being there, always being prepared, never giving up on, just taking a gig or.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing I often say at my seminars, and I don't know if this works for everybody because you got to have the gut for it first of all, but you've also got to have that attitude that you're describing. The question is always, okay, I'll take questions now after we do some bass stuff and talk about things and inevitably the first or second question is like, how do I get to do what you do? And I
Yeah.
usually say, I have no idea, but I know how I ended up here. Okay, everybody's journey is different, and I refuse to believe that I couldn't do this. At the same time, I was realistic enough to realize that it might not happen and probably wouldn't, but I was
Sure.
completely driven. But the things I did know to do was to be prepared all the time.
Yeah.
And by prepared, I mean, now I'm actually better at it now than I've ever been in my life, being prepared. Just having worked with, the next echelon, having been in service to like people like John Fogerty and other people, recording sessions. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many people who are at that level that if you're not, and by prepared, what I mean is it's just based on whatever given situation you're walking into. It could be anything from the way you dress to the attitude you bring to making sure that you go over the material well before you get in there, and not leaving anything to chance, and making sure you have the right gear and that your strings are fresh if they need to be, or that they're really dull if they need to be, but depending on what you're going to be doing, it's all those things. And it's also about getting in there and, being of service to what's happening, and not just going in there and not to take over the thing, but, to listen for those cues when somebody's looking for help or creativity, to know when it's appropriate to get in there and when it's not appropriate, when it's appropriate to just sit back and let somebody do their thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but being prepared, going further back, it was mostly about, being ready to pick up and go, and figuring out how you would take care of yourself and how not to be a burden to the rest of the organization. And most importantly, having the music under having the music, ready to go, and your parts really ready to go and ready to change at the same time.
And I bet that kind of came into play more probably now with playing with John Fogerty, but with some of your other acts that you played with Ozzy, and playing with Megadeth. I mean, that you were part of the band at that point. You wrote the records and stuff, but how were all those experiences? So you play with White Lion, and you have really great success. And then, where does it go from there?
Well, White Lion. Okay, so we ran the gamut of as much success as the time would allow us. I mean, the whole system of music changed. Guns N' Roses came by and redefined what hair, which they just started that way and then they got off that quick because they really weren't that anyway, right? What the
Yeah.
hair metal thing was. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's all in retrospect. So that kind of slammed things really quickly. And then the next thing was Seattle was right around the corner, and that was a garage band mentality where everything wasn't sterilized. Everything was kind of like, this is the way the amps sound when you really crank them up and you play from your heart. Whereas I just remember spending hours and hours on some of those recordings with White Lion, just trying to get just the right guitar sound, and just like
Yeah. Yeah.
6 amps and 20 mics and 3 preamps and all that stuff.
That's crazy. So, I mean, I love those Megadeth records. I mean, I'm a big metalhead, and that's a whole other part of your career is just playing. You played with Megadeth for a couple of records, but I also hear that you played with Jerry Cantrell recently.
Yeah, just
Right?
before this whole thing, we were doing a record just before the the world shut down for a minute. So we actually had to just pull the plug on that for now.
Yeah, and then you played like with Zakk Wylde, you did Pride and Glory, right? And played with Lee Roth. And you also have a new project, Firstborn, right, with Chris Adler.
First, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I'm completely and really and not even falsely excited about that. It's something unique. So I'm really happy about that. That's what we're working on right now. That's our sequester project. It didn't start out that way. That band started out with just the intent of finding musicians and making whatever the music would be with the musicians involved. And it's been like one of the craziest, most organic, weirdest things that I've ever been involved in, because we still haven't been able to get together. And we've made all this really cool music, I think.
Well, I mean, that is the fortunate part about the era we live in, is you can communicate and share music and do that kind of thing, remotely now. And it looks like, you have a cool studio. I remember visiting your little studio when you were living here, closer to the old shop in Burbank, but you're in Santa Clarita now, right?
Yeah, I'm up in Santa Clarita. That was Monster House. That was the beginning of our little venture into video production and music.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, talk about that too. That I always see you as like whatever it takes, and like you're just dedicated to your work so much. What you if it's sleeping on your cousin's couch or you know going gig to gig, it's like you have all these like crazy experiences that kind of led you to where you're at in your career. But like you did, graphic was it graphic art or just photography or
It's mostly based on photography. I'm a high-end retoucher. I actually did that for a number of years for a real company. I used to do
yeah,
I used to contribute to billboards and bus signs and things like that. But movie posters and things like that. And I
that's so cool.
everything like if I do it, I love it. I can't do things I don't really care about. I've done that sort of thing. They don't last very long for me. I lose interest and I become not very good at it if I don't really love doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a good lesson for just musicians in general. Like you have to love doing it and playing with the people that you're playing with. So like this firstborn thing is this, like you became friends with these guys on the road and through certain gigs and you just kind of got together and said, hey, let's just jam, let's toss around some ideas, let's
Well,
do some
Firstborn, really interesting. Chris Adler, I met him last batch of months ago. I can't I can't remember. I think it's getting in my head, man. But we did this thing called Hail, which is a roving kind of metal all-star band. They call it that. I think it's a some star band sometimes. Depending on who's in it. But this is the brainchild of my buddy Abba, Mark Abatista, who just loves to travel and loves metal. So he put these things together, and originally started with Dave Ellefson. So when Ellefson went back to Megadeth, I was the default choice. So he called me up to do that. Anyway, cut to the chase. I mean, we've been everywhere. We've been to Beirut. We've been to Lebanon. We've been to the Ukraine, furthest corners of the world. You meet the best people in the world because their politics aren't forward anymore. It's just people living their lives, and you get to
yeah,
see that. America's great, but so are other places too. Because if it's people
yeah,
that make places great, it's people that make places great. So we go
sure.
to all these places. The last place we went to was Bahrain and Dubai, and we were supposed to move on from there, but the promoters didn't work it out the right way, so we had to abandon it. But anyway, I got to meet I got to meet Chris, and I'd met him when we did Gigantor. Lamb of God was on the bill for Gigantor with Megadeth. And he's a
Yeah,
really sweet guy at the time. He seemed to have a lot on his plate in that, he seemed to really be the leader of that band, So, a lot of, hi, how you doings, but nothing, I didn't get to know him in any way. Then all of a
sure.
sudden, I'm looking at the Blabbermouth, as us old people say now, and I see him on playing with Megadeth. And I go, that's it. He'd be great for that, of course. That makes perfect sense. So I thought, well, that's interesting. What happened to Lamb of God? I guess they're on vacay, or I think something happened with the singer.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then he's announces he's not in Lamb of God anymore. Next thing I know, he's going on this sojourn with Hale. So I was thrilled. I was like, wow, I get to play with the guy. Great. So I met him the first day. Seemed a little guarded, but very nice still. And we chatted and we talked, shared war stories. And we played some shows and we really had a great time. And I saw something in him that, I recognized in myself because I'd been through a few bands. And sometimes
Yeah,
when you're on the other end, especially if it's been a successful band, you can sit there and you can feel like, oh my God, what does the future hold? What do I do? There's a weird kind of like void in front of you when you've
sure.
experienced that kind of success.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I kind of recognized a little of that, and so I chatted him a little about it, and I said, well, what are you thinking of doing? He goes, I don't know, man. I just want to find music. I just want to find something that I really love doing. I don't care what it is. So I said, that's great. Actually, he asked me for Warren DeMartini's number, which I thought was really charming because he's not that demographic, but he loves that music. So I
yeah,
said,
yeah,
sure. So I hooked him up, and as I gave him the number, I said, hey, don't forget to call me if you want a bass player. And I
yeah,
said it because I just liked him, and I love the way he plays drums. And, I didn't expect anything of it. And on the way back, about to get on the plane, and I get this text, and he sends me some music. And it's really off the wall. It was sounding like video game music. I've come to discover now, and I figured it out back then too, but it's actually our guitar player, Myron, who's been doing stuff like that. And at first I thought Chris was testing me, but I thought what it was so good that I didn't want to even go in any direction and insult him in any way. So I said,
Sure.
it's really great. But it turns out that he had been making music with this guy for a while. He found him online through maybe Bandcamp or one of those things, because he was looking for inspiration or something, I think. And they started making music together. And so he goes, well, I've been making music with this guy. Let me send you some of it. And so they sent me some things, and it was great. It was this really weird amalgam of classic metal and new metal, just by virtue of Chris's, frenetic drumming. And like a Van Halen kind of bluesy thing. All of that packed into like these two musicians. And I was like, man, what? So I was just like, I'm just going to respond. I'm just going to react to this musically. I didn't make any preconception. So I grabbed a guitar and I put, just a bit of distortion on, because that sounded like that. It would cut through that sound. And I just played the way I would play, like how I would, like if nobody directed me in any way, shape, or form. If I was in Grand Funk Railroad or something, I'll just take any space that's there and use it and modify to make it something. And so I sent it, and they loved that, and so so we thought, hey, this is cool. Let's keep this in mind. So I thought it was just like, I've done this with maybe 20 people. You send music out and you see if anybody can make anything of it. And most times nothing happens. Sometimes people get excited and then disappear again. And so anyway, Chris goes to do he goes to India to do a clinic tour, and he reaches out to me on a text, and he goes, dude, I found our singer. And I was like, I wasn't aware we had a band, but I was like, I like what he's going with this. And so I found our singer. He's amazing. And he starts saying, and so he plays me a little of the guy singing something of his own. I go, my God, this guy's got it all, So they start sending him some of the music out in India. Girish is his name. And he starts sending back this wonderful stuff that his voice is, to my ear, an amalgam of Dio, Judas Priest, and anybody from the 80s. I mean, good and bad, but all of it, and power. And he could sing high, and lyrically, he's well thought. I mean, and so this, all of a sudden, this thing had a vibe. It had a complete vibe. So that's what we're doing. You can find us, Firstborn Bandcamp. It's on iTunes if you're interested in checking it out. Go right there and see what it's about, and see if you don't agree with me. And if you disagree, maybe you'll like it anyway.
Hey, you said Dio, and my ears started ringing. And
No, he has that kind of power and presence at times, which he shouldn't be a Dio cover. But I mean, every once in a while, he'll kind of grind it, and you can hear his chest fill, and you can hear the intent in his voice. It's like, look, I haven't heard that since,
That's awesome. Oh, man. Oh, I love that so much. So we got a couple of shout-outs here. We got Eric from Helix Hour. He said he was, saying, hey, worked on a project years ago for Jetpack Heroes.
Hey, how you doing, man? Good to see your words.
Felipe here saying congrats from Brazil.
Hey, Felipe.
Yeah, gotta love your bass playing from James, from Joe, excuse me.
Joe Salvatore.
Simon completely wore out that Pride cassette. Yeah, loving that.
Oh, beautiful. Me and Simon Jones. Yeah, DJ Britt, nice to see you.
Hey.
I met you as a kid at the height of Wetline, and you were beyond cool. Well, thank you very much, DJ. I don't know if I tried to do that, but if I did that, thank you. That's for reminding me.
No, I would say you're definitely inspirational to me. I see the way that you kind of build these relationships with all these artists, and I've only ever heard like great things about just how easy it is to work with you, and about your professionalism in terms of just always being on time, prepared. Like we talked about earlier.
Well, I learned on time from David Lee Roth, and it's not that I was ever late, but he used to verbal and like the thing. Okay, let's talk about a guy like David Lee Roth. Okay, tells you exactly what he wants, and I
Yeah.
know you can see that. I know anybody can see that in him. He knows exactly who he is and what he needs. So
Yeah.
working for him was great because it reinforced all those things at a time where I probably needed some reinforcement. He said, if you're 15 minutes late, if you're 15 minutes early, you're 15 minutes late.
Yeah.
So in other words, just I really this is the time we're using to do our thing. So if the downbeat's at 8, you should be there quarter two, and
Yeah.
I've always done that kind of because I think it's smart. And you're not rushing in and you're giving yourself time to think about stuff. But I
Mhm.
didn't really put it into context of being respectful to the person who's hiring you, and that's the other alternate side of that.
Yeah. I think in the so-called like business professional world outside of music, right? They want you to be early, right? And there's always the whole, being early for your meetings, being professional. When it's the rock and roll business, guys are like, "Oh, I'm here to party. I'm here to have a good time." But really, music is a business. It's a music business, right? And
Yeah.
I think the guys that really succeeded, had their fun and did all those great things, but also, knew how to treat it like it was real work. And I think being dedicated to your craft is an important part of being a success in the industry, and just constantly working on new projects moving forward, just like you would in any other, walk of life. I think that's a huge takeaway from when I see guys like you in your position. If I was ever to take something, it's that work ethic, and you just go about it a different way. Where it's you slug it out instead of working in the mailroom. You slept on the couch. And did that.
It
Or
is. It's always the mailroom, my friend. It's always the mailroom because you're only as good as your last gig or your last rehearsal or your last recording session, and you know, in the business has lightened up a little bit more because there isn't so much business to be done like there used to be. But back when it was a big money game, right? You
yeah,
couldn't waste people's time. You couldn't waste studio. Unless you had the money to burn, you really couldn't waste the studio time. And you
yeah,
certainly couldn't waste people's time because their time was worth something too. So, and most bands you see who you kind of show you that their party side, they're being handled by somebody who's got a grip on things, or
yeah,
there's one or two guys in there who alternate, their schedules to accommodate that. But even Guns N' Roses, as far as I know, because I did work with Slash. I mean, he is keenly aware. I don't care what I don't care what he's had to drink. I know he doesn't drink anymore, but back when, he's keenly aware of everything that's going on and what needs to be done.
sure,
Because his drive is stronger than his drive is almost as strong, if not stronger, than any addiction he could have, and that is a valuable asset for anybody to have. It's almost a survival technique.
yeah. That's It's true. I think it's you got to be on your game, even if you're high functioning, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess let's talk a little bit about your gear too.
Ooh.
A lot of Yamaha bases over the years. You're probably most known for that Silverburst BB behind you, but you've also been known to play the Attitudes, and I made that white one for you behind you. You got
Yes, you
the
did.
DP as well. When it comes to like making your sound and kind of like your sound influence, your sonic influences, once you got a hold of, I'm on the canoe and I'm hearing this tone, where in your journey do you say like, oh, I really like kind of this sound or this sound, and like kind of how did you shape your
I,
tone for
I
the
think it
stage?
was. I think it was clearly after listening to Yes and Chris Squire, and
Mm,
then right on the heels of that, Stanley Clark, because they
yeah.
stepped so far away from what a traditional bass tone was. And then
Mhm.
what kind of really centralized it for me was John Entwistle, because what he did was he took like a little bit of what both those guys were doing and put it into like this total fucking R&B thing that was just hit you over the head. Like
Yeah.
like John Entwistle's approach to bass playing was just secular and undeniable, whereas the other guys had kind of carved a very, cool, polite, sometimes rocking place, Entwistle was like right in the middle of that with that, that over trebled sound along with the low end. And, he really kind of kept that aggression like going through. So I think that's what influenced me at a point to really focus on the sound that was coming out of the amplifier. Which some amplifiers do, all kind of amplifiers do different things, and it still to this day it amuses me when somebody says, all right, we'll have an amp for you, because it's like, well, are you gonna have a bass for me too? Because apparently it doesn't matter what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't all make those same sounds, and it's like, well, it comes out of the bass. Well, it starts with my hands, and to a degree that's true. And the bass definitely helps a lot because you got to put something in there, but then there's the other component too. But anyway, let me talk to you because you might find this interesting. I don't think we've ever discussed this, Pat. How I arrived at what you eventually made me with this beautiful white bass, which I'm going to get to in a minute. When I was with, let's see how quickly I can consolidate this. I don't know how we're doing for time, but
don't worry. Take as much time as you need.
We good? Okay. So. When I was with White Lion, I started working with a German bass company, and their basses were the closest thing I could get to an alembic bass, which I still love my alembic basses. They're from, I've got a 1972, 77.
Yeah,
you have one too, right? They're amazing instruments, and they're like they're moments in time. There's something special about them, and it's just because they're a big company doesn't make a bunch of them. It's like a couple of people just kind of put them together. Those things taught me a lot about what different things you can get from a bass guitar. So I've got my old two pickup Series 1 thing, and then and then a single pickup one I got later in the 80s. But anyway,
the Buzzard, right?
Well, I'm getting to that. So with this German company, they came along. They said, "Do you like our instruments?" And they had all the good stuff that the Alembics had, except that they were a little more polite and a little less delicate, if you know what I mean. And so I immediately said, yeah. So I started playing. They had all these weird rhombus shapes and all that. And I wasn't thrilled about that, but after seeing Chris Squire play some of them, I kind of, transposed that in my head and said, I'll be fine. So I was playing that, and after a while, like we were about the second record or third record in with White Lion, and Vito started really getting on me about, man, because I had this big rhombus red, Ferrari red thing with lights on it and stuff. And so he's like, why not, couldn't you just play a Fender? I said, well.
He played a Steinberg.
Exactly. Okay. But anyway, could you play, because we're doing this traditional thing. This is before the Steinbergs anyway. And so I was like, so it perturbed me because the basses sounded great, and that was all that mattered to me, and I could play them well. And they're expensive basses. It wasn't like they were just some toy, So I picked up my Roto Sound. It's my plug for Roto Sound strings. I picked up the package, and on the back there is my hero, John Entwistle, playing what just looks like a hacked up tree. I couldn't even tell what it was, but it's ugly as hell, right? So anyway, later I found out it was his designed Buzzard bass by the same company. Yeah. So just as a lark, because I went to go visit my family for a vacation before we got started on Big Game, I called up my rep over at the Warwick Company. I said, "Do you have any of those John Entwistle basses?" "Oh, that's called the Buzzard." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Could you I don't even want it. Just send it to me. I want to bring it to rehearsal and just take it out for a while and just kind of chide Vito a little bit." And he goes, "Yeah, sure." So anyway, it shows up at my door in Brooklyn. Like I would have had to bring it back to LA when we were going back. But I opened the case and I looked at it. I said, "Man, this is way uglier than I thought." It's too big. It's the horrible color, but it was made amazingly, So anyway, so I strapped it around, and I was like, well, it feels pretty good. Like it balanced perfectly, and it was like in a weird place. And I started playing it, and I was going, this is so much better than the other basses I was playing. So anyway, so I never really brought it out to LA. I just kept it, And when I was done with White Lion, and I started playing with Zakk, that was the bass I brought because I loved playing it. I couldn't get enough of it, and playing that thing barefoot, in overalls, just it made sense because it looked like a tree, But it sounded amazing, And so I made some great records. What I'm getting to is this. So I'm still, when I went into Megadeth, I was still working with Warwick. And I was trying to get something that sounded more Dave Ellefson-like, because these basses seemed to be a little overqualified. The sustain was longer. I wasn't getting that kind of, that envelope sound out of it that the older basses had. So I had run into Mike Tempesta, who used to represent them, a friend of mine. And he said, if you ever want to come by and see what we're doing, I said, fine. And then I saw Billy Sheehan's basses, and I liked those, so I thought that's where I was going, right? And so I came there, and he goes, and so Mike went, you don't want that. That thing weighs a ton. And I said, well, you're probably right. And so he goes, we'll make you something, So he goes, what do you want? So I said, I'll tell you what, the only thing I require, and I just happened to have it here because I thought I would bring this whole story up, but the only thing this is the old buzzard. The only thing I require are these pickups, okay?
Yeah.
That is, I mean, not many companies have done it. I mean, even some companies that did it, they usually do them with the two P-bass pickups in the same direction. There's something crazy about that alignment. First of all, it gives you a lot of room to play the low strings, right? You got nothing but space. So in between those two strings, you have a lot of space. Secondly, it develops these really weird harmonics on the low strings, because that P-bass pickup is all the way by the bridge, and the other pickup is in a normal P-bass position, the middle pickup. Yep. And same for the high notes, seem to have a little more strength, because again, that second P pickup comes about 1/4 of an inch closer than it normally would. Okay, and neither one of them are where you'd put a jazz bass pickup, which is like right on the harmonic. So what happens is when you blend these two pickups, even in their passive mode, it makes this kind of a ringy mid-range tone that builds up weird harmonics between the two pickups. So that's what I said I wanted, and sure enough, John Godesi, who's there before you, had taken that and CNC'd that, and so. Hold on a second. Here's got a dog here.
Yeah, actually, the original Yamaha BBs had that flipped P-bass pickup in that center position.
In the center position, right here. Yeah. This is why I work so hard. We have to feed this thing.
Oh my God!
That's Lita, everyone. She's my studio dog, right?
She's adorable. That's awesome.
You're a good girl. She's just a ham for the television. She's worse than me. Okay, go. So anyway, let me get your bass here. And so what you did was you actually took what I had there and gave me a more preponderant bass sound, because what you did was the neck's a little thicker, the body's a little bigger, and I mean, not size-wise, but I mean, it's a little thicker than that gray one, and thusly, it's really, I mean, it's concussive as hell, which is what I really look for. I look for some, bass, like, the harder you hit it, the more the speaker pops, Yeah, and, I love the new BB styles, because they're basically the same size and all that stuff, but they're somewhat more polite than this. They're more traditional. So
they're a little different because the pickups have been a little different. And your bass specifically, we put the DiMarzios in there, right? We put the Willpowers.
We went for the ones, the Billy Sheehan DiMarzios. Yeah, they have.
Yeah. And those are really great, unique sounds. Let's hear it.
Is it on at all again?
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. It has a aluminum guitar. Not many other people that. And it's got the that little bit thicker Alder body, but the body actually itself was pretty lightweight.
Right. No, it's not bad at all. So that and the I think what we did was use the DiMarzios, not DiMarzio, the Yamaha's double
pickup, yeah.
Right, and this is in Billy's bass. These ones.
Yeah, that's the Yamaha pickup, that one. But really, it's just like a big blade woofer that we were putting on, that first run of the Attitudes when we did the Attitude 3. And then we also put that little circuit in there based on what is in your Silverburst bass, which is a pretty unique thing to you too. So I think that, that whole kind of swapped pickup thing is, when I see it, I'm like, oh, that's James,
Yeah. Well, that's. I mean, it really gives me the sound that is really familiar, and despite having to use several amps, this bass tends to speak in a very specific way.
Yeah, and it's got a really thin nitro finish on it. It's a pretty. That was a difficult project, actually.
How so?
Well, painting it at our old shop and stuff, because I wanted it to be like the thinnest, paint job I could do, because I always feel like, it's not really the material that you paint with, but like how thin it is. And I always judge like the quality of my builds on how thin the finish is. And now that we have Raphael in the workshop, he's like just such an expert at it that, if you, clean out the screw holes, like I countersink all the screw holes before I put the screws in, because if you put a screw in and you didn't clean it out, it might lift and chip out the paint. And you could see it's like thinner than a sheet of paper, right? So it's like the whole thing. I wanted to wear with you as you play it on the road. I wanted to, look like it's been played. And I've been doing a lot of aged, artificially aged instruments, but I like it when, you do it. It tells me that you've been playing it and on the road, that I made it correctly, that you want to play it on the road. That's always.
Yeah, no, I like taking them out clean and mojoing them up. We used to do that with Zakk's guitars. If he got a new guitar, he'd pass it around to everybody and just basically literally drag it around. I mean, he just like them beaten in, and just. I guess there's something to that. I mean, there's also something to like keeping them vibrating at all costs, to really break them in so that the wood settles together and you get that tone. And this, I mean, every bass I've had has done that, but this one has done it to a remarkable level. After a couple of years, it's coming to its own, because the lower mid range has become way more prominent than it used to be. And I haven't moved pickups. I've done nothing. I mean, it's basically exactly the way you set it up when I got it. So it's settling into itself very nicely, which I love, because that means this is a 30-year guitar, easy. That's what I look for.
That's cool. They make a lot of like these kind of artificial aging techniques, and Yamaha has its own technology, IREP, that pretty much vibrates the instrument, so it feels like it's been played for a long time, and it vibrates the entire instrument. So it's kind of like when you break in a speaker, right? It's like brand new. It sounds a little brittle, and then you play it for a while. It more naturally wants to have those notes jump out. And you talked a little bit about not getting the sustain you wanted from certain instruments, and it's kind of an interesting thing with that, where neck through instruments have the shortest sustain, even though people think it's the longest, and then set neck, and then bolt on actually has the longest,
right?
Which is pretty wild, but I think it kind of lends to some of that tone too, where it has a little bit more punch.
Well, the thing that I noticed with the bolt-on as opposed to the neck-through is that there's an envelope, there's an attack. Anybody who knows synthesizers know there's the attack, then there's the decay, then there's the release, right? And these tend to do that, whereas the neck-throughs are smoother. The attack doesn't come as far forward, which means that these are just better for picking.
Yeah, a little bit more punch. Yeah, I think all the different methods of making instruments have their own kind of unique, sound. I like just making all kinds of stuff. I even like doing unique joints instead of I've seen a couple of guys make instead of an actual bolt-on. There's like a wedge that you would drive in. There's no glue, no bolts, no nothing. It's a really old school Japanese technique, where it kind of overlaps and kind of locks into itself. There's a lot of that cool
like a tongue and groove kind of thing,
Yeah. It's just like you ever are interested, check out some like Japanese joinery techniques, and it's mind blowing. Some of the stuff that through tradition have made their way into guitars and stuff. It's very cool. And yeah, I mean, I love your sound. Of course I loved your records with Megadeth. Listened to the White Lion stuff, over the last few weeks, just kind of getting prepared. I loved listening to you there, and it's always been great hanging with you, having you come by the shop, giving us your ear when it comes to developing new products and stuff. And I hope that sometime soon you can come back to the shop. We'll have to work on your bass, but hang around for a second. I'll help you out. I'll come pick up your bass. We'll get it all tuned up for you.
Okay. Well, I have a new idea, so we're gonna talk to the people there and see what'll come of that.
Oh, I'm always
that's one of the things I love about Yamaha, and I'm so happy you're working for them, because your work is exemplary. But I mean, they really do take. Nobody has a gun to my head, except for all these great basses that I get to play. So. But they really do. They take their time with the research, and they really listen to us artists, us guys who take the stuff out, and they really consider all that when they bring something to production to kind of send out to the masses. And the newest BBs are a testimony to that, because I mean that's when I came on board, they had the big BB body shape. And I asked them to please make me a smaller one, because I'm not the biggest guy on the stage, And they did that, and they ended up moving in that direction for the new BBs. And for me, they're great, but I can imagine most players feel more comfortable with them.
Yeah, I think you were a big part of that too. The reason why we let artists ask us to make some crazy stuff, and really we give a lot of guys carte blanche, when it comes to making something unique, is because we want to understand what you're asking for and why it's important to you, and then we see it in use on stage, and we hear how well it sounds or something. And your Silverburst bass, it's a little bit smaller, right? And that was one of the things that a lot of people like the BB, and there's diehards that have played it for years and years, but size, not everybody's a 6 foot person like myself, or there's people from all different nations that have different heights and hand sizes and stuff. So we're always trying to make something that's good for everyone. And I think when it comes to development, we do try and listen a lot when it especially when it came to BB, designing it in a way that kind of matched our current product line, and also was we're always trying to improve ergonomics, sound, and the cool part is, like, nothing is really holy. We're not tied to our past, even though we have this like really long 130-year history. We're not afraid to keep moving forward and do something unique. So thanks for helping us with that. It's been fun making you stuff. And if people want to listen to more of your music or learn more about you, where should they go?
Well, they can stop by jameslomenzo.com, of course. And they can also, for now, they can look at Firstborn. I don't know if we've got a .com yet, but if you go to Firstborn with an E, first Firstborne, you can go to the Bandcamp there. You could just do a search and see what we're up to. We're kind of really moving to get this thing rolling for when, there's somewhere to roll to. So, we're really excited about this band, and we want to see if we can build a fan base that feels the same way we do about the music we're making.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And
My pleasure, Pat.
One of these days, hopefully things calm down a little bit, but stay healthy, stay safe. And
you too. Next time Marceau is with us the whole way, all right? No more of this chickening out. You got that, Scott?
Yeah, well, we got to get Scott in on the action. Scott's our wonderful guitar AR person, and he's got tons of great stories too. So thanks so much, and thank you everybody for listening. Till next time, cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.